Well, good to be here, and always good to be work with the University of Kentucky. They do such an excellent job with all their forage program. Appreciate y'all coming out for this too. And this is a different program, and it comes at it from so many angles and presents so many ways to work with weed control. And I'm going to be talking about mixed species grazing as part of an integrated weed control program. And I typically run them all together. It's just as a flurd, some people call it. And one of the great things about running sheep with cattle is it looks like you got lots of calves out there. And I think we all agree that the best weed control is good forage production. So just good agronomy techniques, having the fertility right, managing the carbohydrate reserves, as Chris has already covered. And I like that there's a horse nettle in that picture, and it's reaching for light. Makes it more tender when it reaches for light, right? More vegetative. And I like to think about growing something instead of killing something, even though I will reach for the jug, but I feel like my management failed me. I didn't make a wise decision in the past if I have to reach for the jug very often. So here's what I hope to cover is develop a goal. Everybody needs a goal and know where they're headed in order to make wise decisions. What are the challenges and benefits of multi-species grazing? What ratio, how many sheep, how many goats, how many cattle should you run? And then the stocking rate, animal unit equivalent, we'll talk about that. How to introduce new species into your operation. The fencing, and then high density, short duration grazing always improves utilization or amount of weeds that they consume. And then closing argument, we're going to leave that for tomorrow at my pasture walk if you want to attend that. We'll talk more about the details at that. It starts at 10 a.m. tomorrow in Allen County, and I've got a little flyer back there if you want to attend that. There's about 95 registered right now. So the goal, this came from holistic management, and I like their goal setting, is quality of life, form of production, and vision for the future. Those three parts, I like to put them in a run-on sentence. And the quality of life could be that you like to go fishing. So you got to make time for that in your goal. What do you want to do with your land? And then the vision, that's the big one, is what do you envision your land's going to look like in the future? And all of us have a different vision. So benefits of multi-species grazing: less weeds, higher utilization, improved grazing and manure distribution. You're running like 6 sheep for 1 cow, so that means they're going to be better dispersed, and they're going to distribute their manure. And one thing I didn't mention yesterday is that manure comes in pellets as if you bought it in a bag. That's a huge deal, especially goats when they eat a multiflora rose and they turn that into fertilizer. I saw a huge gain from adding goats when I first added goats to a cattle operation. The increased profits, Idaho State did some research where they added cattle to a sheep operation, increased meat production by 24%. When they added cattle to a sheep operation, it only increased the production by 9%. That's how productive and how good a grazers that sheep are. And goats are the most diverse from other animals. I would never call a goat a little cow. I might call a sheep a little cow. So you got to watch it because they're more competitive for the same forage resource. The gestation period being almost half what a cattle is, that's important. Increasing the flock up to 70% in a year. That's a double-edged sword because some of the New Zealand folks have 10,000 ewes. Quite a few of them do. So they can flood the market whenever they want to. If dairy's low, we have more sheep. So they can change real quick. We haven't seen a big fluctuation. I've had sheep and goats for about 15 years, and there's only been one little lull in the market. Right now it's about $2 a pound or higher for sheep or goats. And goats are a little higher than sheep, but they should be because they're harder to manage. Less dangerous. The only exception to that I know of is black-bellied barbados. They're flying sheep. My farm, I've got a few of them, or I think I've got 2 left, and my farmhand got knocked down, some ribs broke because we were working them, and this ewe decided to flight and hit him, took him out. That's the good thing, I'm a little bigger than he is, so she took out the smaller man. All right, so challenges. We all hear about parasites with small ruminants, and it's definitely an issue. If you graze above 5 inches, you have a lot less parasites. The feet problems, fencing. Of course, we have to have more wires because they're a smaller animal. They go under, not over, so you don't have to worry about a real tall fence, but it needs to be low to the ground. Mineral, the sheep aren't as tolerant of copper as cattle and goats, so that needs to be dealt with. Ketosis is a huge deal. That can kill a lot of sheep or goats. And the way, if you're not supplemental feeding, you change the birthing date to like when you have green grass, and that way their energy requirements not dropping just prior or at birthing. Working facilities, that can just be, if you're a cow man now, you can just put welded wire panel around the working facility and you're ready to work the sheep in the tub. And then predators are the biggest issue. They're the biggest threat. We can overcome all those other things. Predators, we can kind of overcome. You have to be on your toes with that one. So the first thing is to inventory the pastures. What do we have out there? If it's all briars, we need goats. If it's forbs, then sheep. And then if it's a lot of tall grass, it'd be cattle. This is a rainfall simulator, and I can't help, I wanted to show it, so I've put it in here just to show any cover is better than no cover. I'd rather have weeds as to have no cover. Look at this. This is runoff in those front jugs. And the less cover we have, the more runoff. The more infiltration goes with more cover. So it's an inverse relationship there. And I've run this hundreds of times. It always shows up this way. So the worst thing is no cover. And if you were to spray, plant something, or change your management so that you get cover out there. So species of animal that you're going to stock. You know, again, do you have browse? You need goats. Blackberry briars, they love blackberry briars. They love ironweed. Sheep will eat it too. Sheep are known for forbs, like ragweed, lamb's quarter. They love white clover. Goats don't like white clover. You'll increase white clover where you have goats. But sheep love white clover. And then the cattle, they like to wade off into tall vegetation. Sheep and goats don't like to because of the coyote, the predator thing. They'll edge it. They'll work it around the edge and work their way in. But the species that you stock needs to be dynamic, because as the plant community changes, I recommend you change the animal species. With cattle, particularly high density grazing, you can change what they eat. Now, Kathy's got a different technique of coming at it, but if we do high stock density, we can get them to eat a number of weeds. Anytime we make them eat something, though, it's important that they have a quality diet so that they can nutrients balance toxins, as Kathy has pointed out. So we might even have to feed hay if we're making them do too big of a job on a field. But you can see at 30,000 pounds they ate. I'll name those off. We got an amaranth, or smooth pigweed, chickweed, poison hemlock. That one is poisonous, so you definitely have to have some nutrition to go with that one. And then that's Ailanthus, the worst tree in the woods. And then here's ironweed, even consumed at 50,000 pound stock density. And wingstem. Cattle eat wingstem better than sheep and goats. That's a terrible weed, that yellow crown spear. And then I'm going to go on to the sheep. They love buttercup. You know, I still don't want fields of buttercup, but it looks more like a forb than a weed. Now, I don't mind a little buttercup out there, but we try to keep the plant height high enough that, that we don't have a lot of buttercup. And then plantain, or plantain, it's a natural dewormer because it has tannins in it, and they'll consume it readily. That farm on the right with the sheep is overgrazed in my opinion, but it hadn't been mowed in 20 years, and it's in the East Tennessee. That was in a drought period, to be fair to them, but there's not any weeds there. It's just pretty much grass. Serratia lespedeza, sheep just kind of tip it. Goats eat it pretty good, but don't plant your whole farm in Serratia lespedeza. Cattle don't like Serratia. In fact, I used to run a farm and we would graze it and it had Serratia and it would leave pure Serratia. We'd cut the Serratia for hay and feed it in the winter. Cattle even like Serratia in the winter, and it's still a natural dewormer, because of the tannins in it. This is sheep, and that you see the horse nettle there. The worst weeds to me are the ones that shade my desirable forage. Well, they took the shade effect off. This is about what they look like typically on my farm, so I don't look at it being a terrible weed. Ironweed, they don't all look this stripped of leaves, but they do eat it. Mare's tail, eat it. This is goats. Pretty similar to the sheep, except for the blackberries. And goats will, sheep will eat the blackberry, but only when it's tender, fresh leaves. So it really ought to be just about 2 foot tall for sheep. For goats, they'll eat any of it. They love blackberry. And these are some plants that have tannins in them or terpenes or other secondary metabolites that can help with deworming. Wouldn't want to plant the multiflora rose, of course. Yeah. And then autumn olive's not recommended to be planted anymore either. And then mimosa can be invasive. So anyway, there's some plants that if you have them, you can use them to your advantage, and sometimes I call them medicinal pasture. Some of the protein and energy has been shown before, so I won't dwell on this. Privet, though, is an evergreen, so it's really high protein, good neutral detergent fiber. Anyway, the numbers look good on it. Brambles have a bad calcium-phosphorus ratio. I'm going to flip on through these. I just noticed this the other day, that the hairy vetch, I think it's an underutilized forage. It'll grow on about any land, whether it's wet or poor fertility or high fertility, and it's almost a weed. But of course, we don't want it in our fence rows. But if you're grazing the land, then they will eat it, and it won't become a problem. But look at the protein here. In this vegetative state, look at the fruit to head stage, how these others drop off in nutrition. Look at hairy vetch, still high, very good numbers. I planted a bunch this fall, and it's about 7-8 inches tall now. Kind of feathery and light, and it won't tolerate a lot of grazing because they like it so well that we're delaying grazing. Animal unit equivalent. Think of a 1,000-pound cow, and these are the numbers of sheep and goats that it would take to be equivalent to one cow. So, those are pretty low numbers, and what makes them be equivalent is the lambs weighing so much, they gain so much and all, and they're having the 1.5 lambs per ewe or nanny makes that math work out. Dr. Twitch already covered this, but some anecdotal information just is that if you stock above 3, this is just pure stocking of small ruminants, you stock above 3 ruminants per acre, then the grazing dimension is going to fall off. You're going to need to use supplemental feed. The stocking rates are so dynamic because we don't all do the same things. We don't all have the same fertility, the same rotation, the same recovery times. All of those things come into it.
So is that 3 in addition to a cow-calf
No, that's what I wanted. I tried to make clear. That's 3 stocked by themselves. If you were running a cow-calf operation, you wouldn't want to stock over 1. I don't recommend over 1 ewe per cow. And then with goats, it could be 2 goats, but you got to have a lot of briars for that. And really, I like the ewes to be stocked at 1 for 2 cows. Well, I've got a slide that's coming up on that, but I'll go ahead and cover it. If you overstock, you get above that stocking rate that we just mentioned, 1 ewe per, let's say, per cow, and you fence the perimeter for the sheep or goats, and now you've got a single wire here, and the sheep can go everywhere, but the cows can't. So the sheep are the first grazer. Well, the cattle are going to be getting seconds, and so they're not going to perform as well. Their body condition is going to fall off, conception rates fall off if you overstock. And it's tempting because the sheep are doing so well. Got to have more of these. And then they fall apart. They don't fall apart, but the cows do. But when you start putting your fences up, anyway, it's very dynamic. You get above that 1 ewe per, I'm going to say per 2 cows, then you're on that break point. So co-grazing, running them together. The guardian dogs are the hardest thing to get adapted to new species because they're protecting the herd. So I run them, again, let's say the cattle are over here, we got sheep over here, or sheep and goats, and the dog's in here too. Well, the dog will run up and down the fence and run at the cattle, and the cattle kind of run off. Do that for at least a week, but really till you think it's time, and then turn them into a big pasture and give them room to get away from each other if they want to. It wasn't that big of a show on my place. We were wondering. I know a friend that turned out some llama in his cattle. He just pulled the cattle trailer out there and let the llama come running off the back. And his cattle went through 3 fences and were found about 3 farms over. So they thought that a dinosaur had come out after him. And in handling the sheep and cattle as a flood, don't get them all stirred up because you know how they come running to the gate anyway. The cattle could trample them in the gate. That's where you're most likely to get the trampling. They're very respective out in the, I'm amazed how respective the cattle are of the sheep out in the field. Now I have a friend I worked with and he did co-grazing. He had limited shade and he sold his sheep because the cattle wouldn't let the sheep go to shade. Sheep are the bottom of the pecking order. Goats and cattle, somewhat equivalent. And on my farm, the cattle are first, then goats, then sheep. Anyway, so the way to overcome that, if you just had one shade tree here and the cattle had it all used up, all we got to do is do a 34-inch wire here. Now the sheep have some shade. So he didn't have to sell the sheep. Cattle aid in predator control, particularly the Brahma breeds, anything that's very defensive of their babies. And you can use a 32-inch, it's that pigtail height poly wire or any wire. The sheep go under, but the cattle can't get to it. This is a picture from the past where I had goats just running all over the farm, and then the cattle were contained with the single wire. And you see there wasn't many weeds. That was a drought year. I don't remember exactly which year that was. But here's where I was still running the single poly wire, and the sheep could go everywhere, and the cattle couldn't. And this is about the time I decided these cattle are not in good condition. They're not doing well. So we had to contain the sheep with multi-strand wire and use 3 poly wires to do that. Something like 8, 8, and 12-inch spacing from the ground. 8, then 8, and then 12. Okay, so this is a before picture. This has been grazed with cattle for years and years, and we got goats, and this was very low stock density. And the goats have such a preferential for briars and broadleaves. So that's the after, and that was about a month later. This is in a 50, 60 acre pasture. Here's another before picture, and that's electronet and the sheep and goat people. Most of us have some of that. It's very handy. It can get tangled up and all if you don't handle it just right, but it's very handy. Anyway, so those briars are too mature. I would recommend you turn in on briars when they're more like this height. And if you want to get rid of them, turn in at the first leaf, and then don't let them ever get a leaf on them. So that's an after picture. You can see that above browse height there's still some leaves, and I kind of wanted to keep my browse, so I kind of liked that. And see there's lots of grass still there. Using the leader-follower technique. Most people think of leader-follower or having separate groups whenever they think of sheep and cattle. If you have the sheep on one side of the farm and the cattle on one side, to me that's not doing the best grazing management because you're using too much at one time and you don't have the long recovery. So leader-follower is the next thing to think about. And the big factor in managing this for grass management, I don't like to graze over 3 days in a pasture, and I don't like for animals to get a second bite of the same grass. You have to think about the nutritional requirements. This is very complex to manage correctly, I think. So in general, if one herd needs to move, say we're creep grazing this field here, and the cattle are back here. Well, the cattle need to move, but the sheep and the calves, they hadn't grazed this one down. We've got to move both groups. Otherwise, you're going to run off and leave the cattle. So you've got to move both groups, and you just keep doing that. So it's sort of a hopscotch thing. Okay, weeds that are still a problem. Even though we got sheep and goats and cattle, some of these are still an issue. Wing stem. Crown's beard, it's out there right now. I used a cultipacker on some this fall because I noticed in walking in the field, I always try to step on weeds as I walk across the field. It'd be crazy to walk around them. But that one snaps when you step on it. So I cultipacked it, and it worked. Next year I'm probably going to spray some. I'm also going to try to train them to eat them like Kathy does. And so the nimblewheel to me is the worst weed in the east. It's a grass, looks like Bermuda grass, except for it's got that straight seed head. It's very sod forming and takes over, very dominating. A lot of people don't realize that they think it's Bermuda grass. But anyway, so there's some techniques that you in management try to shade it out with your desirable plants. Or you can graze it really hard right before it makes seed and then give it a long recovery, and that can help. I almost hate to mention it, but if you stockpile the same fescue field year after year, beginning your stockpile at about August 15th, September 1, right when this baby is fixing to make seed. So if you do that year after year, I'd bet money if there's some already out there, you're going to get a lot more. I also try to not rotate when the dew's on, because look at your boots after you walk through this stuff. It'll be covered in seed. So rotate in the afternoons. Bitter sneezeweed, just not a desirable plant. Nothing really likes it. Goats eat it a little. And then this joint head grass, usually in the shade. I hadn't seen it. Terribly explosive. And then another one I don't have up there is Perella mint, but we don't want to train them to eat Perella mint. You'll have some dead animals. Boom or bust. This is a technique. Now, I want to preface this. I wouldn't use this technique. It's kind of like an overgrazing technique. However, if you've managed well through the years, and let's say nimblewheel is taken over, I like to hammer that nimblewheel right before it goes to seed. So that's going to be about August 15th, September 1, right in there. As soon as I see the first seed head, it's time to hammer it. Take it to the dirt and then get out of there and let the good stuff recover. because it's kind of done its thing and it's waning at that point. So that's one technique of managing those weeds. The sacrifice area, I didn't say it back when I had that picture up there, but sheep will graze until the dirt is exposed if you let them. If you set stock, they'll just keep grazing. They love to graze, and they love low grass. So this is a strategy to keep from overgrazing the whole farm. And we need to feed hay on these sacrifice areas. And what makes a good sacrifice area is a weedy field, one that's low fertility. Go to those places whenever you need to lock down. That's when you've reached those minimum heights that Chris talked about earlier. Like to have some shade in those areas, so you may have to plant some trees and fence them off until they're about 15 foot tall or so. Yeah, this is what we think of with goats is this 6-inch mesh wire, but it's a goat killer wire because the head goes in but doesn't come out. And you can put some PVC pipe across their horns and it works, but who wants to do that? So anyway, I like the 12-inch mesh better than the 6-inch mesh. And this is extravagant to me. I'll use high tensile wire out in the fields. The only woven wire you really need is around those holding pins and all. Now this new high tensile woven wire is getting cost effective because you need less post. So it's something to look at. This is, if you've got existing barbed wire or old woven wire fence, you can add on 2 or 3 of these offset wires and make it workable for sheep and goats. What we do with the escapees, let's say that we've got 2 or 3 that get out. You've got to contain those babies because the others say, oh, they're getting the best we're going to, you know. So anyway, so we write a big E on their back, and if they get out more, they go back to continuing education. And that's more electric fence. And if they get out again, they go to the sale barn because we can't have that. But they look mighty good because they're forward grazing all the time. So here's the barrel, the hanging barrels for the copper in the cattle mineral, this old tobacco scaffold wagon. And so that's just how that's done. And then for the sheep or goats, we'll have their mineral set up. And if it needs some special hay, we'll have a 34-inch high wire around that, or 32-inch. So here's the animals moving. One thing I wanted to point out here, in sheep and goats, it's true of all animals, but the last ones through the gate, there's a corral right here. All I'd have to do is really capture that group, because that's probably the problem group. The rest of them are probably healthy enough. Those are probably limpers or anemic or something back there. They might have been on the back 40, right? But most likely they're the issue. All right, so that's pretty well it. I'm on Facebook if you want to follow me on that. And also I have that pasture walk tomorrow at 10 a.m. and we've got a little extra food, so y'all just come on or let me know if you want to come. So, any time for questions?
Oh yeah, you're good. Good. Questions for Greg?
Y'all got to ask one.
Oh, there we go.
You got 3 wires on 1 reel?
No, they do make that. It's Smart Fence from Gallagher has one. Well, it's multi-reels on one payout. But no, we just use independent reels. Yeah. Yeah. Orchard grass. That seems odd, but I haven't planted Kentucky 31 in 15, 20 years, probably 20 years, because of the endophyte.
How do you plant stuff when you plant it, Greg? And repeat the question.
Right, okay, so the predominant forage is orchard grass, and then how do we plant when we do plant? It's a chaotic operation, so, but We used to, my dad had an airway years ago, and I don't believe in running airways over fields just to be running them over fields, but it's a good renovation tool. And then we'd pull a harrow and a cultipacker behind that. But yeah, so usually we're frost seeding most things, and I know that's not ideal for orchard grass, but we'll frost seed clover every year pretty much. Not on every field, and I'll use half rates. So I use 1 pound of white clover and 2 pounds of red clover, and on the thin ground, 4 pounds of annual Lespedeza. And then we'll shake that up a little bit. There's some chicory. Chicory doesn't frost seed well, but we'll add that in the fall when we seed. This fall we had some nimblewheel we gave up on, and so we used glyphosate on it and did a pure reseeding, and it had some chicory in it, along with a few annuals, and I know that's not recommended, but they're real low rates of annuals. It didn't work out real well in that the fescue didn't take. It was bull fescue. It looked real good in university trials, and so we're trying it. We did replant it. I understand why the universities typically don't recommend annuals in there, because see, the annuals took, and I felt like it was a failure on the perennial, and now I've got cheat also that came in, so it's a quandary. Anyway, I shouldn't have got off into all that, I guess, but. Yeah, they all run together. It's easier. Simplicity is what I'm best at. Whenever you separate herds, there's reasons to separate herds, of course, because of different nutritional requirements. But on my place, we can't keep up with it as well. Like, I'm only there a few days of the week, and we might not check on that group. We say, they're okay. Well, then you go up there and it's a disaster. So we like to just keep it as one unit. It gives a longer recovery too, and we think we just get a lot more benefits. One thing I have found though is second calf heifers don't fit my operation because they don't rebreed as well with that one herd. So, but I'm not willing to separate, so we're just buying cows as replacements now. So, but the sheep do extremely well. You have to cull. Culling is very important in order to improve small ruminants. More important with sheep and goats than it is with cattle.
Got one more? Well, let's thank Greg.